Right, thank you. So my presentation today should take about 20 minutes, and as you can see, it's presented in 4 parts. First of all, I want to talk about the group of citizen scientists who have been developing their investigations of therapeutic landscapes and local pilgrimage destinations. Second, I'm going to explain what those citizen scientists mean by the term therapeutic landscape. Then the third part of my presentation today will discuss how they're investigating therapeutic landscapes and local pilgrimage destinations. Next, my fourth section today will be a summary of their conclusions so far. And after all that, I'd be happy to receive as many questions as you have. So let's see if I can change slides. That works. So first of all, I want to tell you about the citizen scientists who I want to talk about today, and they are the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group. Felixstowe is located in southeast England. In fact, it's probably the part of the UK which is closest to the Dutch coast. And you can scroll through the work of the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group on their Facebook page, and I'm sure they'd welcome your constructive feedback on what they do. But in summary, they were founded in April 2018. Their primary aim is to conduct impact analyses on their local community-based conservation project. There are 36 members of the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group, and they're completely unfunded. So all their projects have no financial support. All the members are volunteers. So now let me move on to the second section of my presentation. And that's to summarize the ways in which the therapeutic landscapes are understood by the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group. So very broadly, a therapeutic landscape or a therapeutic environment is a form of environmental sanctuary. In other words, it's a form of natural refuge where people can find a sense of calm, where they can feel restored. They can sit and take time to pause and think about the causes of their anxiety or stress or other problems, whether those other problems might be as a consequence of debt, family, friends, work, or the wider world. And to make their work on therapeutic environment and local pilgrimage destinations specific, the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group is focusing on a local river estuary, and that's the estuary of the River Deben, which meets the sea at the easternmost part of the town of Felixstowe. But I think it's interesting to recognize that this appreciation of therapeutic environments is very close to the Japanese idea of Shinrin-yoku, isn't it? In other words, Shinrin-yoku is literally translated as forest bathing. So it can be thought of as an immersion in nature and the restorative effects of nature. But Shinrin-yoku can be compared to the German idea of Wald-Einsamkeit, which I understand can be translated as being alone in woodland. But it's also about trying to make a therapeutic connection with the natural world. And I know there are similar ideas in Scandinavian languages, and the same similarity also applies in a number of African languages through their use of the word Ubuntu, meaning a deep therapeutic connection with nature. And in all these ideas about therapeutic environments, there's a recognition about therapeutic benefits applying both to physical health as well as mental health. Let me move my slides along. But putting all those ideas together, let me summarize the 5 principal ways in which therapeutic environments are being defined by the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group. So, first of all, there are questions about the ways in which visitors to a therapeutic environment are changed by their visit. So in these cases, visitors might be calmed by their experience of the environment. Alternatively, they might be inspired and fueled with renewed energy. Second, visitors to a therapeutic environment might feel an enhanced sense of stability in their lives. In other words, they might feel more grounded and centered around their sense of self and their connections with their natural environment. Then, the third way in which the Felixstowe citizen scientists are defining therapeutic environments is through the idea of a therapeutic environment being inclusive and supportive. So that's quite the opposite to a place being exclusive, intimidating, or unsettling, isn't it? Next, the fourth aspect of therapeutic environments, as they're understood by the Felixstowe citizen scientists, is through an environment being an escape or sanctuary from their problems and being a place to reflect and reappraise their lives. And finally, the fifth element of this way of understanding therapeutic environments is through qualities of landscape and place which elude precise definition. So they may be thought of as being mystical or spiritual. So those ideas, which Henry David Thoreau explored in parts of his Walden book, and John Muir also wrote about them. And the theologians Matthew Fox and Bede Griffiths have also recognized their importance within the overall comprehensive understanding of what a therapeutic environment is. So at this stage, that's as much as I want to say about how therapeutic environments are being understood within the investigations of the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group. So now let me move on to the third part of my presentation. And I want to summarize how the Felixstowe citizen scientists are investigating therapeutic environments and, of course, the estuary of the River Deben next to their town. And that investigation began in August 2024 with a series of informal one-to-one interviews and small group interviews with visitors to the River Deben estuary. So this is the type of work which is considered by authors such as James Spradley in his ethnographic interview work from 1979, but still greatly admired. And John and Lynn Loftland have also discussed this kind of ethnographic work, haven't they, in their analysing social settings work, which was also still greatly admired. So those ethnographic ideas of establishing rapport with interviewees and eliciting specific cultural meanings of words and using structured, semi-structured, and unstructured discussion were all at the foundation of the work in which the Felixstowe citizen scientists began their investigation of the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment and local pilgrimage destination. And all that background work informed the wording of the telephone questionnaire, composed of 10 questions, which was conducted by the Felixstowe citizen scientists on 100 randomly selected members of the Felixstowe Community Nature Reserve. And those telephone interviews were conducted between the 6th and the 10th of January this year. And those interviews, in the interviews, each interviewee was asked to provide a number value between 0 and 10 on the extent to which they agreed or disagreed with a question. So, for example, the first question which each telephone interviewee was asked was, do you find that time spent at the Deben estuary at Felixstowe is good for your physical health? And so the range of responses to that question was between 8, mostly 9s, and some 10s. And the average response came out as a 9. And the second telephone interview question focused on the interviewee's appreciation of the River Deben estuary for its psychological benefits, such as calm, quiet, and stillness. So that question also got an average response of 9. Then question 3 focused on the telephone interviewee's appreciation of the Deben estuary's influence on their sense of priorities. And those responses averaged as a 6 on a scale from 0 to 10. The fourth question in the telephone interview asked interviewees how the River Deben estuary affected their social life. For example, through a place having a pub, two cafes, as well as a beach and a yachting clubhouse as places to meet family and friends. So the average response from the telephone interviews for that question was an 8. The fifth question in the telephone interview asked about how the environment of the Deben estuary is remembered either from childhood or in more recent years, and how those memories of time spent in the Deben estuary are therapeutic. So the average response to that question on a scale from 0 to 10 came out as another 8. And then questions 6 to 9 asked about the River Deben estuary as a form of sanctuary. So question 6 asked about the Deben estuary as a sanctuary away from the stresses and anxieties of the interviewee's life. So examples of that type of need for an environmental sanctuary would have been caused by personal financial debt, family concerns, professional work challenges, friends, local environment, and stories in the media. And that question about the Deben estuary as a sanctuary from those challenges averaged as a 9. But the other way to think about environments as sanctuaries is to also recognize them as being locations within which healing, calming, and other tranquil activities can be undertaken. So question 7 of the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group investigation of the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment asked about it as being a sanctuary where individual scientific activity can be undertaken. So those individual scientific activities include bird watching, wild plant identification, and other projects such as finding evidence of the Anthropocene, such as climate change. And that question got an average response from the telephone interviewees of as another 8 on the scale from 0 to 10. And then question 8 in the telephone interview asked about the therapeutic experience of finding oneself inspired to do art, painting, sketching, photography, and creative writing. And that question got an average response of 6. And of course, an important further question would ask if it's the creative activity which is therapeutic, or whether it's the river estuary environment which is therapeutic. So that's where the original ethnographic interviews are so helpful, because it's very clear that it's the river estuary environment which is primarily therapeutic for the people who've been interviewed. And then there's a secondary sense of healing which the interviewees drew from their creative activities, which were inspired by the Deben estuary. But having said all that, for a completely different set of people who might take part in future set of interviews, the results could be entirely different. But thinking about question 9 in the telephone interview, the citizen scientist asked about therapeutic experiences derived from appreciating the environmental beauty of the Deben estuary. So when we think about environmental beauty and environmental aesthetics, I can refer you to the pioneering work of Arnold Berlin and his excellent book, The Aesthetics of Environment. But I also want to remind you about the environmental aesthetics work of Emily Brady, because her ideas were also very helpful to the Felixstowe citizen scientists in the context of this investigation. Anyway, the telephone questionnaire question about the Deben estuary and its environmental beauty defined through its sights, sounds, natural fragrances, tactile textures, and tastes got an average response from the telephone interviewees of a 9 on a scale of 0 to 10. And finally, the last question in the telephone interview asked a different kind of question, and that was, how confident are the telephone interviewees that the therapeutic qualities of the River Deben estuary will remain available for the next generation? And unfortunately, but perhaps predictably, the average response was only a 3. So the investigation of the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment by the Felixstowe Citizen Science Group is very nuanced indeed. Whoops. That's better. And this is how it's been presented. And if we align the telephone interview results with the ethnographic interview data, we can move on to the fourth part. I would be happy to share this sheet if you're interested. The fourth part of my presentation, which identifies some initial conclusions. So the first initial conclusion to draw from this investigation is that the Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment is of fundamental importance to helping the mental health and the physical health of people who are vulnerable at the moment. So this research will be promoted, is already being promoted locally in the Felixstowe area and more widely as a contribution to actively helping people improve their mental and physical health by appreciating the Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment. And the second conclusion here is that the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment is complex. In other words, there are many aspects to the therapeutic quality of that environment. And that complexity was unpacked first using ideas which arose from the ethnographic interviews, but secondly, from the averaged values which arose from the telephone interview. Then the third conclusion to this investigation is that the River Deben environment, considered as a therapeutic environment, is vulnerable. Certainly the low confidence in response to question 10 in the telephone interview definitely shows that. Then the fourth conclusion to this work shows that experiences of the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment can clearly evolve. So it'll be interesting to conduct further ethnographic and telephone interviews later this year and beyond that to get a clearer understanding about those changes. Next, the fifth conclusion shows that the Felixstowe citizen scientists should continue with their inclusiveness in this work. In other words, there are women, young people aged between 18 and 25, people of faith, people of colour, and people identifying as LGBTQ+ within both the ethnographic interviews and the telephone interviews. And finally, the sixth conclusion so far is that the Felixstowe citizen scientists have shown how many of these interpretations of the River Deben estuary as a therapeutic environment can be included within collaborative map making of the Deben estuary. And again, that collaborative map making will also continue in future months and years. So I hope this presentation has been of interest. Very similar work is currently being developed on the ways in which the River Deben estuary is being appreciated by local people of faith as a local pilgrimage destination. And I'd be happy to share the initial results of that within the chat in a moment. In other words, work beginning with ethnography and then moving on to the development of questions in a telephone interview. But now, I'll be very pleased to receive your questions if you wish.
Thank you so much, Adrian. This was a really, really interesting, insightful presentation, and I personally really resonated with it and with your findings. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I think you can stop screen sharing, and we can also probably stop recording. So
Okay.
we have space for discussion, questions, follow up from